Hello, everyone. Thank you so very much for being here tonight. It's so good to see so many of you out here in person and online. We're here to celebrate the true cost of wool, a vision for revitalizing the Canadian industry by Anna Hunter. You may applaud that loudly. Apologies in advance to anyone sitting in the direct line of the sun. Rest assured, it'll slowly torment everyone else before leaving us alone for the rest of the night. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge, of course, that we are here in Treaty 1 territory. The land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Innuit, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, of course, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We're so very grateful to 910 Publications, particularly their inflammable mastermind, Kim Worker, for helping to make this evening a reality, and of course for publishing this book in the first place. I won't take up too much of your time right now. We'll just let you know how the evening is going to go. There'll be a presentation from Anna here from the podium, and then there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions. So if a question does occur to you, I'll allow those to percolate over the evening. I'll approach you with this microphone just to ensure that those watching at home can hear your question, and then we'll move right along with the rest of the evening. The only thing I'll put in your mind right now for signing procedure, which I'll go over in excruciating detail at the end of this event, is that we'll ask you to remain in place for just 1 second while we safely transport Anna to the signing table just beside our cash desk, and then you'll all be able to descend and get books signed. Now, rather than come up with some very tortured description of this book, I noticed that Alexa Ludeman of Tin Can Knits had a wonderful description of this book in her blurb for it. So she says, "What is the true cost of wool? From a lamb's first breath to the yarn in your hands, this book explores the journey our fibre takes through the Canadian wool industry. Learning about this journey can help us make informed consumer decisions within our craft, understand the challenges facing sheep farmers and mill operators, and take action to ensure a thriving future for Canadian wool." This book's author, Anna Hunter, is a first-generation sheep farmer and wool mill owner in eastern Manitoba, Treaty 1 territory. She is passionate about building community and connecting rural fibre farmers with urban consumers, fibre artists, and crafters. Anna believes that regenerative agriculture and climate-beneficial food and clothing are integral to moving forward as farmers, fibre artists, and as Manitobans, and she is passionate about growing a vibrant Canadian wool industry. Her first book, Sheep, Shepherd, and Land, came out in 2023, also from 910 Publications. Please give a raucously warm welcome to Anna Hunter.
Thanks, everyone. You can hear me okay in the back? It's never been my problem projecting, so I'm so excited to be here. I'm so thankful to McNally for hosting this and for making it happen. I have a few other thank yous, but I think I'm gonna leave those till the end. I also wanna be thankful for the land acknowledgement. I wanna go a little deeper before I really get into this. We can't talk about wool without talking about sheep, and we can't talk about sheep with talking about land and agriculture. And agriculture has historically been and continues to be a tool of colonization. And an interesting fact actually about Manitoba is sheep were the first domesticated livestock to actually be brought over by settlers. Selkirk had this crazy plan to transport Spanish merino from Spain to Red River Valley. And he did this by transporting them by a boat to York factory and then trying to load 48 sheep onto York boats, which are, you know, in your mind, think of canoes, and then making that 750-kilometer trek down over 12 portages. I know there's a few farmers in the crowd, so if you've ever tried to move sheep from simply one paddock to another, now imagine boats and portages. It was a failed attempt, but eventually sheep got here, and they were the first sheep to you know, be on this, they were the first livestock to be on this land. And not only that, but, you know, Canadian wool was used to clothe our military that was active in trying to put down the Métis resistance. So when we talk about wool and when we talk about sheep and the future of agriculture and farming and wool, it must include a call to reconciliation in a really deep and meaningful way, and how we consider that with the land that we farm and the materials that we use. So there's so much going on in our world right now. In Manitoba, as our communities to the north and the east of us are burning, I was a little worried about getting up here and talking about wool and yarn and knitting. But as I prepared for tonight, I realized that my book is about the wool industry, but it's actually about so much more. It's a call to action for all of us to participate in building communities and supply chains that focus on regionally based production, local meaningful employment with living wages, an industry that works towards decarbonizing our transportation, our agriculture, our manufacture systems, and seeks to put animals back on the land to be a part of regenerating soil health. Globalized supply chains and their inevitable consequences of environmental destruction and labor exploitation don't have to be our only option. We can do things differently, and our communities will be better because of it. So I hope tonight I can share about our wool industry, where we've come from, where we're going, and put forward some solutions to our climate crisis and towards building communities that we all want to live in. So I submitted the first draft of this book in November of 2024, and I had no idea the tariff war that was waiting around the corner for us. So in mid-February, when everyone was out seeking their favorite locally made products and fiber artists, I'm going to use fiber artists to generally cover like knitters, crocheters, spinners, weavers, rug hookers, all of those. So those of you that aren't in that industry, when I say fiber artists, just picture your favorite knitter or crocheter or whatever. So fiber artists were no different, and they took to social media and the internet, posting about their favorite Canadian indie dyer or their favorite local yarn shop, their favorite clothing brand. It was a really beautiful moment of this buy local ethos and supporting entrepreneurs, which in the fiber arts industry is mostly women. So it was a really great moment. But what I realized is that there was a real big missing piece in this conversation. The majority of these businesses are transforming a finished product of wool yarn, but there's no context to where the wool was grown and where it was manufactured. So Kim and I, the publisher, we got together and we said, we need to put this book out immediately. This is really timely. How fast can we do it? And here we are. That was February, now it's June. Our wool and textiles are deeply embedded in a globalized system of transporting raw materials to factories that are very far away and then bringing them back again as finished products. There's very little understanding of what it actually takes to produce them. We can buy an $8 t-shirt or a 15 ball of yarn and never consider what it actually took to grow the wool or the cotton or the linen, to spin it, to dye it, all of those things. So the way that I sort of got into this book, the way that it started for me in the very beginning, was a late night in 2019. I was working in my mill. I was tired. I opened up Instagram, never a good combination. And I read a private message from someone, just one line: "Why is your yarn so expensive?" And for any makers in the crowd, that's always an infuriating question. So I wrote a response and then immediately deleted it because it was in all caps and I don't think it was my kindest moment. And instead I wrote on a Post-it note, the true cost of yarn. I brought it today. I took it off the mill machine. You can see it's been weathered since 2019. And it started this idea in my mind that the cheap yarn or the cheap shirt or the cheap sweater you buy is actually really expensive. And if we started to understand what really goes into those things, we would probably make different decisions. This idea wouldn't leave me alone. How disconnected we are from our wool, from our yarn, from our textiles, the tools we use for our crafts, and how we can create that connection again. So I started writing this book to explain the true cost as a farmer to actually grow and manufacture local yarn. I just wanted it to be a tool to help me educate people that thought my yarn was too expensive. It turned into an exploration and a very nerdy deep dive into the wool industry in Canada and a critical look at our entire textile system. Okay, so what does our textile or our wool system actually look like? I hope you buy the book and read it, but I'll do my best to give you the highlights. Okay, so we have just under 1 million sheep in Canada, around 858,000 if I was being exact. Those sheep are raised predominantly for meat, for lamb or breeding stock, but they still grow wool. And those sheep grow about 2.5 to 3 million pounds of wool a year. They are sheared once a year. It's what's necessary for their health. And that wool is still a beautiful, viable product. So what happens next is a little disappointing. And for those of you that are working with wool right now and you haven't heard this, it will be a little bit of a disappointment. A lot of that wool is being burned. A lot of that wool is ending up in our waste system, and what isn't is actually being shipped overseas. So just under 90% of all the wool we grow in Canada is actually exported out of our country. COVID disruptions have changed those numbers a bit, but the baseline picture is that most of our wool leaves our shores. On the other hand, as fiber artists or textile artists, 95% of all the materials we use are being imported. So there's this big disconnect between what we're growing and what happens to that and what we're using and where that comes from. The commercial wool yarn industry in Canada is a multi-million-dollar industry. Crafters spent more than $170 million on yarn and knitting supplies in 2022. Imagine if we could change those numbers, if we could keep 90% of the wool that we grow in Canada and invest that money that knitters and fiber artists are investing in crafting supplies and put that back into the pockets of our own farmers, our mills, and our communities. So when we use that imported yarn, a big part of the picture is missing. There's no traceability information available. Usually when I do this talk in a knitting circle, I have everyone who's working with yarn grab their ball band and say, where's your yarn made? And like very seldom does it say on that. Our information on our labels does not include the farms that wool was grown, the mills where it was milled, the dye houses that were used, the kilometers that the materials traveled to end up in the store, the wages the workers made of the condition in the factories. We don't have that information. And so it's really hard to make the best decisions based on all the implications of that. But it hasn't always been this way. In fact, in Canada, we once had a very thriving textile industry. 125 years ago, we were growing around 12 million pounds of wool, and we had the capacity to manufacture it all ourselves. If we wanted new clothing, we simply had to access the wool and the processing from within our community. We had the knowledge, the labor, the machinery to manufacture what we grew and what we needed. Even here in Manitoba, we had the Sifton mill. I don't know how many of you might remember that. If you've ever been to the Manitoba Museum, there's a lovely little display on one of the hallways, home of the iconic Mary Maxim company, all the iconic sweaters. But that actually started out as a mill producing blankets, batting, wool socks, and even producing spinning wheels. We also had the Brandon Woolen Mill, later named the White Buffalo Mill. It would manufacture, in its heyday, it manufactured up to 300,000 pounds of local Manitoba wool a year. They produced blankets and pillows and socks and yarn for knitting. So what happened? Well, actually, not surprising, it was international trade and tariffs that had a huge impact on our industry. I really hope you read the book because I'm not going to go into it, but it's pretty interesting. In fact, in 1866, we had a tariff agreement with the United States called the Reciprocity Treaty. It was our first formalized treaty or trade agreement with the United States. And the US canceled that treaty, citing that it wasn't good for their economy. And it had a huge impact on the wool industry. We were shipping a ton of wool down to the US. They canceled the agreement. All of a sudden, our mills were flooded with Canadian wool that hadn't had any other use. And there was government investment into innovative machinery, and we developed tweeds and flannel blankets. And it was a huge boom for our industry. So, I hope that we can also take examples of this and use it as a blueprint for how we move forward with the situation that we find ourselves in today. So the influx of new designs and different wool from places like Britain and Australia and New Zealand had a big impact on the Canadian wool industry. As those were easier to enter our country, our wool industry lost its market share. And then synthetics showed up. In 1929, the first nylon factory was opened in Ontario, and it decimated the wool industry. It actually, in my opinion, decimated our entire textile system. We went from clothing that was made from cotton, linen, and wool, and sometimes silk, to a clothing industry that's made up of polyester, rayon, lycra, microfiber, and these other basically single-use straight pipeline from the ground and fossil fuels to our dumpsters. As synthetics took over more of what people wanted to wear and what was cheaper to make, wool lost even more of its positioning in our wardrobes and in our shelves. And then finally, as the WTO, World Trade Organization, and other trade agreements took off, we saw the introduction of low-wage labor countries who were able to manufacture everything we consumed at a much lower cost. And this took us to where we are today, which is wool being essentially worthless. I know that's such a dangerous thing to say when there's knitters in the crowd, because we know the value of wool, but in our country, in our industry, it is essentially worthless. There's very little traceability information on the materials and the textiles we buy. But I do think there is a big, different way that we could do this. I believe that wool can change the world. And I want to tell you a little bit how. I'm going to read from my book now. So I often say that sheep are superheroes, especially when I have tours and people are looking at the sheep and they're watching sheep eat grass and interact with the land base. I say that they're superheroes. They transform inedible plants into clothing that keeps us warm or cool. Wool is hygroscopic or temperature regulating, by the way. And through the process of doing this, they help our soil ecosystem capture excess carbon from the atmosphere and store it in the soil to feed microbes that will then help the grass grow again, which will lead to more wool sweaters. Today, 64% of all our textiles are synthetic, derived from fossil fuel, petroleum-based chemicals, and petrochemicals. These textiles are actually de-sequestering carbon that has been stored for millions of years in the ground. Even with recycled plastic bottle t-shirts, our synthetic clothing and yarn is a one-way pipeline of petroleum out of the ground and into the landfill. Meanwhile, wool only accounts for about 4.3% of all the textiles we use. Wool is 50% carbon and has the potential to not only store carbon from the atmosphere, but to recycle at the end of its useful life that carbon back into the soil in less than 6 months. We need to divest from the synthetic textile and yarn industry and build up a fiber economy of wool and other sustainable or regenerative textiles. We need to take care not to trade one material for another without also choosing models of production and value chains that represent the true cost of these materials. The further removed we are from the value chain of our wool and textiles, the less we know about who is making the decisions and what factors influence their decision-making. In a globalized capitalistic system, profit is a key driver. This means that we're often stuck in a cycle of trade-offs. If we want a lower price, then we have to pay lower wages. If we want to produce more and do it faster, then we have to increase our reliance on fossil fuels or sacrifice quality craftsmanship for the sake of efficiency. So when we purchase a cheap ball of wool yarn or a cheap shirt or a sweater, the cost of production wasn't reduced. It just means someone or something else subsidized the cost. Perhaps it was the farmer or the mill worker or the rivers and lakes or the climate. We can't know these answers if we don't have a clear view of the supply chain our wool travels from beginning to end. So for me, all this is like pretty heavy, right? Okay, so let's get to the really good stuff. So for me, I think we have a way forward. Actually, I think we have many ways forward, and that's what's really exciting. There's not one answer, and when we create solutions that are community-based or regionally based, those answers can look like whatever our communities look like. So for me here in Manitoba, the first step is to revalue wool, to see the opportunity in this wasted resource. So, you know, farmers in Manitoba are making anywhere from like, I don't know, 15 cents to, at the very high end, 75 cents a pound for wool. That doesn't mean much if you're not a farmer, but it's pretty low. Most of them are pretty, they're not incentivized to do a better job of growing wool because it's not worth anything, which is why so much of it is ending up in our waste streams or our landfills. So that's the very first thing we have to change. We have to bring back value to wool. So for me, this came in the form of wool pellets. I don't know how many of you have heard of wool pellets. It came as a first answer for the waste that we were getting in our mill, the stuff that was too dirty to transform into yarn and textiles. So we started pelletizing it and it became fertilizer. When we put wool pellets in our garden, it adds nutrients, slow release nitrogen and other micronutrients. It adds water holding capacity, so it reduces irrigation and reduces runoff. It adds aeration. It can be used like a mulch and reduce slugs. I always say at this moment that my mother-in-law swears by it on her hostas. So there you go. So what happened when we started turning waste wool into fertilizer is we developed a new product that all of a sudden could be applied in a way bigger format. It was no longer dependent on fiber artists to purchase. Now anyone who loves gardening, and in Manitoba we really love our gardens, could utilize this wool. It became quite popular and gardeners were pretty excited. It started with the knitters. No one needed to convince them that another wool product was awesome, but then gardeners started getting really excited and they started seeing the results of these wool pellets in their gardens. And then I started running out of waste wool in our mill and I started buying waste wool from other farmers. And then I ran out of waste wool from other farmers and I started buying their entire wool clips. And they were more than happy to sell me their entire wool clip because I was paying $1 a pound for their dirty wool compared to the 25 cents a pound that they were getting on the commercial commodity market. So now we have farmers that are very excited about getting a decent price for their wool and we can't keep up. So as I thought about how this, and wool pelleting is a much simpler process than running a wool mill. Don't get me wrong, I would hate to see all the wool in Canada be turned into fertilizer. It's just the first step. But it's a much cheaper process to actually turn it into fertilizer. So as we were experiencing more and more wool that people wanted to sell us to turn into pellets, I thought, how can we grow this? So I approached the city of Winnipeg and I said, you have all these green spaces, you have all these flower planters on medians, you have beautiful plants and flowers all throughout the city. You know, what if you gave the wool pellets a try? It'd be good for Manitoba farmers, it's local, it's recycling a waste product. And so they gave it a try. In 2024, the city of Winnipeg did a test plot. So I brought them a bunch of wool pellets and I was pretty excited and didn't hear anything from them. They used them. I didn't hear anything until the middle of August last summer. And I got an email from the head gardener who said, your wool pellets outperformed anything else the city used when we hit that really dry week or two last August. Even the guys who like drive and operate the water trucks noticed that the wool pellet test section was retained its moisture more than anything else. So of course this confirmed what I already knew, which is wool pellets are awesome, but I thought here's an opportunity for us to grow. So I approached the city again, said, how can we grow this? How can we build it? And then I approached 13 other municipalities in Manitoba and said, how can we get wool pellets in all of these municipalities? So if we could all of a sudden use all the wool that's being grown in Manitoba, it's about 51,000 kilos a year, and turn that into pellets just in the beginning, we would immediately inject money into the pockets of Manitoba sheep farmers, which is great. Farmers work really hard and they don't see a ton of return. So that would be really exciting. we would be recycling nutrients back into our soils in Manitoba. We'd be replacing synthetic fertilizers with a truly local circular product. And we'd be providing jobs in rural Manitoba as we build up this pellet system. And that's a big win. And that's a solution that would work here. But who knows, there's a similar solution that could work in any community, in any jurisdiction all across the country, and they don't have to look the same. That's what's so exciting and innovative about a regional approach. So I think when farmers are incentivized to grow a better quality wool because they're being financially compensated adequately for that wool, we could see new growth in the industry. And this is where I think we have huge opportunity. So instead of pellets, we could start turning that 51,000 kilos of wool into 14,285 wool sweaters, or 115,000 wool toques, or 100,000 pairs of wool socks. Or perhaps we might decide that that wool is actually better suited to household textiles. From that same 51,000 kilos, we could produce 16,000 wool pillows, 6,250 wool duvets, or 2,700 wool carpets. Obviously, this won't meet the needs of our entire population, at least not at first. But this thought experiment can provide inspiration for what could actually transpire if we developed regional processing facilities. The question always comes, how do we change things? They're so embedded. We've been doing it for so long in this way. How do we actually change things? Well, this is one idea of how we can change things. I think we need to stop thinking about scaling and growth as this giant thing, but start thinking about how we can do it just in our very own community. Thank you. So now let's get to the Q&A, because that's the best part.
So yes, if anyone here has any questions, just put up your hand and I'll wander over to
I thought you had the first question, Josh.
I also can project, but for the people that are listening at home. So I was actually thinking about you this week because, for many reasons, all good. But one of them was that I just bought a new mattress protector because mine from 12 years ago, it worn out enough. I needed a new one. I now think and purchase things differently than I did 12 years ago. And so I ended up buying from a company out in BC called Fawcett, and they make wool and organic cotton wool mattress protectors. But their wool comes from New Zealand. And it made me think of you because of all of our conversations and how often what we run into as an issue is that it's not that we don't have the raw material, it's not that we don't have a ready audience for the end product. The issue is that we don't have the industry in place as far as machinery, as far as manufacturing in order to do it. And it got me thinking about like how, and I don't know if you have the answer to this, and maybe some of the answers are in the book. And also maybe some of this is things that government people should be reading the book and thinking about. But off the top of your head, is there a way for companies that are manufacturing wool products within Canada could be, instead of sourcing their wool from overseas, sourcing it from Canada? Like why is it that the immediate thought by so many of these companies that care about sustainability, care about sourcing ethically, all of that, but their immediate thought when they think we want wool is often Australia and New Zealand, and not thinking about the farms that are just outside of their own city communities?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the simple answer is infrastructure. we just simply don't have the infrastructure to do what these companies are doing. We have a fantastic company in south of Steinbach that's making wool mattresses. I highly recommend buying a wool mattress. They're amazing. But again, they source all their wool from California because we don't have actually the machinery that makes the batting in the size that they need. Much of our remaining infrastructure is all in Quebec and Ontario. And because we have such a huge country, it is very expensive to navigate moving large amounts of wool across the country. It doesn't make it feasible, especially when things are cheaper offshore. So the big answer is infrastructure. We need more infrastructure to do this. And this is where I think our community-based answer can meet that, is we need regional appropriate solutions to the types of sheep we grow across the country. In Manitoba, Alberta, Saskatchewan, where we have these large ranges, we have big farms, we can grow really nice fine wool. We can grow the breeds of sheep that we want to wear next to our skin. So it makes sense that in this area of the country, we would invest in infrastructure to produce quality or clothing quality wool. Whereas in Quebec and Ontario, where they don't have those ranges and their climate is slightly different, it doesn't make sense to have those sheep. It makes sense to have sheep that are perfect for insulation and wool mattresses and wool bedding. And so we should be investing in the infrastructure to meet that need there. And so then, I mean, I probably could go on for a long time about all the solutions, but I'll leave it with leadership. We don't have leadership in the country to envision a wool strategy that would meet all those needs.
How does anyone actually say no to you?
I was just gonna say Luke should come up and answer this question. For those that are on the live stream, the question was, how does anyone say no to me? Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think we all have a voice, and we all need to become more bold in asking for this. And it's easy, even for me, to just say, oh, this is always the way it's been. Obviously, we can't do anything different, or it's too hard, or there's not enough money, or there's not enough time. And I think that good things happen in rooms like this, where people come together. And I mean, I'm sure there's someone in this room that has a great idea or a good connection, and all of a sudden this was a spark that's going to take us somewhere else.
Because not too long ago in the past, we were able to actually have the infrastructure to deal with the wool that we were producing in Canada. What would that look like? Was that, what did the investment look like that, maybe from the federal government or from a government perspective, or was it all supply and demand? And when we look today, what would it look like today in today's agricultural landscape, that investment in infrastructure to make some of these things more of a reality?
Yeah, good question. Historically, a lot of the mills were family legacy mills. I don't know about government investment. I'm not really sure how much. There definitely was investment and subsidy, and you know, in 1879, there was this whole thing with the Macdonald government for protecting the wool industry from British imports and investing in machinery that was needed. It was seen as valuable because we didn't have any other option. This was the clothing and the textiles that our entire country utilized, or most of our country utilized, and it was necessary. I mean, one of the unfortunate things about today is that wool is often, it's not seen as an agricultural commodity in Canada. It's just simply a byproduct. So it's treated like a byproduct. Most farmers are literally throwing it on their compost pile. So I think we definitely need to get in front of the right people to encourage that investment. And yeah, it's hard to imagine going from 0 to 100, because that's where it seems like we have the demand. Of course, there's people that want wool, wool products, and we do have some wool, but to going from 0 to 100 is really the big challenge. And I actually don't know if I have that answer. I just have this one little answer about pellets and then what comes next.
Thank you, Anna. I know you spend quite a lot of time going across the country and around Manitoba talking about this and talking about wool pellets. I'm wondering, what are your impressions of the awareness, interest in, and willingness across the country based on your experiences in the last number of years traveling and talking to different folks in Manitoba and beyond to affect some of this change?
I have the privilege of speaking mostly in front of knitters who are such a beautiful, wonderful, nerdy bunch of people who absolutely love everything to do with wool. So there is so much excitement. There's a real like fever pitch of excitement over the Canadian wool industry right now. And, you know, I've been involved in it for 15, 20 years now from varying degrees, and there is an excitement that I haven't seen before. My hope is that at some point there will be people that are excited who also are in positions of power in government or are in positions of decision-making in industry, or can be that person that can take this idea or these ideas somewhere else, and that we can grow it beyond knitters. There's a little like subheading in this book, I don't know if that's what it's called, subheading, subchapter, called Building a Little Army of Wool Activists, because I feel like that's where we're at right now. 2 years ago, I started a national nonprofit called the Canadian Wool Collective, which was meant to take this energy and excitement by fiber artists and take it and bring it to action to create tangible ways that we can change things. We started a certification project, the only one of its kind in Canada, where you can now find a certified wool logo on those things that have been grown and manufactured in Canada. So that sort of idea and value is, I think, the beginning of a big change.
I think I've heard that King Charles was interested in sheep in Canada. I'm not sure if it's in wool only as well, but can you say what you know about that?
Sure, yeah. So King Charles started an organization in England called Campaign for Wool many years ago. And in Canada, 10 years ago, maybe 11 years ago, there was a Canadian chapter that was founded called the Canadian Campaign for Wool. And they still exist, and they're doing some excellent work. They have put out some very excellent documents around how we can develop our wool industry in Canada, how we can develop our shearing industry in Canada. And they are really working high level. They work with large corporations like Holt Renfrew to really advance a higher level of fashion industry utilizing wool. I highly recommend you check out Campaign for Wool and the work they're doing. I would say like Campaign for Wool is in the corporate boardrooms, and myself and the Canadian Wool Collective, we're boots on the ground or boots in the mud in the wool industry.
You talked about pallets. What about house insulation? I mean, is there a thing why is that not being received as the expense, the inefficiency? Why is not? There's a huge market that is all fossil fuel based, basically. Can you address that?
Yeah. Wool insulation for housing is a great idea. It's a wonderful innovation. Wool insulation exists in the United States. It exists in the UK. It's very popular. The biggest challenge, or from my perspective, the biggest challenge in Canada is that it is not approved in the Canadian Building Code. So if you are able to access wool insulation and you want to put it in your house, you need to get an engineer or insurance or maybe both to sign off on that, and that adds to the cost and to the process. So when we talk about how we actually make changes, this is one of those things. If we could get wool insulation written into the Canadian Building Code, that would open up the opportunity for businesses to evolve and start selling it. And we could see a huge supply chain, but no one's gonna start a wool insulation business when it's not an easy choice for new home builders. So that's one of those things where we have this barrier, and if we could address that and change that, then we could see big growth. And I don't know anything about the Canadian Building Code, but perhaps one of you does, and you feel inspired, and we can talk after. We can get the Canadian Wool Collective to mobilize thousands of knitters across the country to get the Canadian Building Code changed.
Anna, where do you see wool playing a role in art? Like, I use wool to create art and I pay a premium for it, like it's not pennies on the pound. Or would you like to see that done?
More. Keep going. Maureen and everyone like Maureen, use more local wool in your art and in your production. And I mean, that is what's really, I think it's a really important position, the people who see the value of wool and pay farmers what it's worth and seek out and build those relationships with local farmers and develop that tiny little beautiful supply chain. And we need more people who want to do that, who know that that's a possibility, and who can figure out how to navigate that. So I say yes, let's do more of that. And Maureen's stuff is beautiful, so check it out if you're interested in wool fiber arts.
This is really interesting. I really enjoyed your talk.
Thank
And I
you.
was just wondering, for local gardeners, would these pellets be available for small scale type gardening?
Yes.
If so, where if you want to buy?
Shameless self. I actually almost brought a bag of pellets. Thanks for asking that. And we mostly have them available for small scale gardeners. So you can buy them from me on my website. But if you're Winnipeg local, they are at T&T Seeds, Shelmerdines, St. Leon's, Ron Paul Garden Center. Am I forgetting anywhere else? Oh, Pearl and Hank. Awesome yarn store on Portage Ave beside Sergeant Sunday. And oh yes, Sage Garden I think still has some. Oh, and Wolseley Wool, yeah. So there's some good options. And if you didn't write those down, come talk to me after and I'll tell you where they can be found. And if you have a garden center that you love visiting, maybe drop it in their ear that they should bring in wool pellet fertilizer.
And were there any other questions?
And I love your wool and I've knit with it, and my favorite scarf and hat are made with it. But I also love knitting baby hats, and I'm just, you and I have talked a bit about how there's not that really soft merino or something that would you put that next to a baby's skin. What would it take to have that kind of yarn here?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And lots of people say like, oh, Canadian wool's too scratchy. But we already have breeds in Canada that have a similar, if not the same, next to skin softness. We have the Rambouillet or the Targhee or the Columbia or even some Corriedales. And they thrive in our land base here in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta. And what's missing, again, I'm a broken record, is the infrastructure. We don't have any fine wool processing mills in Canada. So we actually could raise merino sheep in certain parts of Canada, but it wouldn't be worth it to the farmer without that fine wool processing. So this is, another one of those opportunities where if we definitely have the demand. If we had the infrastructure for production, we would see farmers seeing value in raising those breeds of sheep and putting more into that because it's financially beneficial. So yeah, we're a ways off, but I think we'll get there.
I always learn something new from you, and thank you. I've known you for a few years, and our beginning was centered around your and Luke's return to Manitoba and the resistance initially that you were met with to start what you're now growing. Let's put it that way. And I'm interested to hear from you a little bit about that perspective of what it takes, the perseverance, the courage, the chutzpah to actually stick with a plan.
Right.
And you both have navigated a ton of different challenges throughout those years. But speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I actually write a lot in the book about who gets to be a farmer and the challenges of becoming a farmer or breaking into manufacturing in our current, climate. And it was really hard. I think I had run a successful yarn store in Vancouver and sold it, and we moved here and we went to traditional banks and said, we want to start a farm. We're going to do this great thing. We already have this customer base. We already have small business experience. And they're like, oh no, definitely not. Like, as a brand new farmer, there's no way we are taking a risk on you. We are not financing you, or try again, come back again. And so it was really discouraging. And then again, once we started our farm and we crowdfunded our farm, we ran a Kickstarter campaign and we were able to start our farm through support of folks here and around the country who believed in our vision and what we were trying to do. And that was really incredible. But it takes a lot of work to do that. It's impossible to expect every farmer who wants to get started in fiber farming to have access to crowdfunding or access to traditional financing through a bank. So growth is really limited in that way. And then again, when we wanted to start our mill, same thing. We demonstrated that we could start a farm and we could keep animals alive and we could generate a product and we could sell out of that product within minutes of loading it on our website. And our limitation was processing. And again, we were turned away. And, I think we need a different model of investment. We need a patient capital model, one that is not interested in an immediate return on investment, but one that wants to build into community and economic development and rural employment and seize the opportunity, even though the risk is really high. And I mean, I appreciate the compliment, but I hope that as we grow the industry, it doesn't require dogged chutzpah to keep going, because some days that almost killed us.
And are there any more questions? If there are no more forthcoming, do you have any final words you'd like to share, Anna?
Yeah, I do. I really need to say some thank yous because my name is on this book, but it is the result of so many people's hard work. So I really want to thank Kim Worker. She is the publisher, editor, supreme handholder. I did go through quite a challenging time at the end of writing this book where I was like, really challenged by globalized supply chains in my own life. I was like, we should just give up. There's no sense in trying to do anything differently. I am just gonna, start processing everything overseas and give up. And so I'm really appreciative of Kim, who let me say those things and feel those things and then encourage me to push through them and come up with what I did come up with. So I'm so appreciative of Kim and all her work. I know she's online, so I'm really thankful for her. And Lisa, who's here, who did the amazing layout and design of my book, all this one, but also the first book that I wrote. And I'm so thankful, Lisa, Lisa's one of those designers where I'm like, I have this idea and it's like this and it's like this and it's big and I don't know what I'm doing, but can you make it happen? And then she sends me something that's exactly what I wanted. So I'm so thankful for you. I want to thank Luke, my husband, who continues to say yes to crazy ideas and then brings me back to reality and then makes them happen. Christelle, my dear friend, fellow farmer, and co-pilot on so many things. We're hosting a sheep and wool camp next week. So we've got 12 people coming from across the country to learn more about this, to like nerdy deep dive into it. And I think like 4 days ago, I was like, oh my gosh, Luke, people are coming and they're staying and they're farming and it's hot and we need a shower and it needs to look really beautiful like the rest of the farm. And he did it. So I'm very thankful for you, Luke. And my kids who aren't even listening because all I do is talk about wool at home anyways, and they've heard it all before. But I am very thankful for their support and their sacrifice. But more than anything, I am really thankful for all of you who continually just show up and support me, but also support other local farms and businesses. For all of you who are committed to understanding the true costs of your wool and your food and your other things that you consume and pushing for a better vision of our world. So thank you.
Thank you all so very much for your questions and for your attention this evening. We will be moving on to the signing portion. So again, we'll ask you all just remain in place for 1 second. We'll lead in and through the crowd, and then you can join us in a dramatic line of signing photo. Feel free to get a copy of the book signed first. You don't need to pay for it first, but we would appreciate it if you would pay for it before you leave. We're so very thankful to 910 Publications for publishing this book and making this evening a reality. When Kim initially approached us about this event, she said, "You're in for a treat." And as such a tremendous and engaging speaker, it was no word of a lie. So thank you so much, Anna, for being here. Thank you all for joining us here tonight. And I'm going to ask you to join me in one more round of applause.